No. As in when I announce the slide or something, are people even around me? Do that?
I don't know. अभी किसका सेशन है? हाँ उनका तो रेडी है ऑलरेडी वी हैव ऑलरेडी एंड प्रेजेंटेशन
Laying down some ground rules, requesting everyone to put their devices on silent mode. We have some time allocated for Q&A at the end of the session. You can post your questions on Slido. The web link for the same is now displayed along with the hashtag. Request you to sign in now. Advanced analytics can transform the way on how insurers do business. Insurance claims is one of the many fields where advanced analytics play a significant role. Presenting to you our next session, Insurance Claims Optimization using Advanced Analytics. Request you to welcome the chair, Mr. Rajesh Dalmia, Senior Partner, EY India. Calling upon our speaker, Mr. Karthi Purushothaman, Leader, Global Financial Services and Partner, McKinsey and Company. Over to you, Mr. Dalmia.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us this opportunity. I'd like Karthi uh, to give the presentations, and then after that we'll take some question answers on that. It's a very interesting topic. Looking forward to Karthi's presentation.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you. I know it's close to the end of your 2 days, but we'll try to keep this as crisp and as interesting as possible, and we'll have more Q&A during the time. So what I want to do is maybe take about 10, 15 minutes just very quickly to talk about AI and the state of AI and how it's evolving in insurance for 5 minutes, and then we'll spend time on specifically AI in claims and a little bit on the underwriting part as well. So just as way of background, so I started my career at McKinsey in the US, and I spent about 10 years there. 5 years into that journey, around 2015, we started this talk about AI, and there was a lot of conversations that happened. But funnily so, I've been talking to a lot of my friends after this whole revolution of ChatGPT and the generative AI only in the last 6 months. So people kind of only recognize this field now with respect to how the natural world has taken over. But if you actually look at this, it is actually becoming an integral part of many organizations. And we at McKinsey kept running these surveys year on year. If you look across this chart, you would actually see how AI has significantly improved profit margins for companies that have proactively adopted it. But the more interesting part is people who have partially adopted it have actually seen a little bit more destruction in value than actually enhancement in value. So if you go down this, the actual blue line suggests those who have proactively adopted this strategy and the things that they have seen in terms of their profit margins. And funnily enough, both financial services and healthcare, if you start to put a couple of our fields together, have seen the biggest impact in terms of how AI has impacted those industries. And in fact, in both of those, partially adopting AI has actually led to a little bit of a value destruction as well because of reasons that we will discuss later. Like I said, I think many people call this era the iPhone moment for AI as well. And particularly if you start to look at these figures, which is the time to 1 million users, all of us are very familiar how ChatGPT in 5 days had about 1 million users who are actively engaged. But we are also seeing that with the actual coming of age of APIs, these applications are also going to get more and more common for example, a year ago when we were actually working with one of the leading insurers in Asia who were contemplating using AI, a lot of the conversation was around how do we generate conversational content for, let's say, agent or for service representatives to actually go out and deal with prospects and customers. Now it's much more of a reality than 1 year ago. Now, I just wanted to, and during the break I was talking to Mr. Anurag as well. One of the biggest things that has happened is AI has constantly continued to reduce the cost of prediction. Now, one of the most common examples that you will see is how Google search, actually when it started, the biggest decision it could have made was actually introduce the button called Google search in addition to this button called I'm feeling lucky. Because if you actually go on google.com, you would find two buttons. I'm feeling lucky was the equivalent of this era's ChatGPT, where it gives you the answer directly, but Google search was the equivalent of actually letting it learn from users continuing to select the choices. So what has actually happened is the cost of prediction year on year has continued to go down because of this feature, because your results continue to feed prediction and how this continues to actually help. Now, this is not just from me, but if you look at, there is an interesting book, Prediction Machines by Professor Ajay Agarwal from Canada, who actually says that AI is not a threat, but AI actually increases the value of judgment. Because if you look at this loop, it's not just inputs leads to prediction, action, and outcome, but the feedback loop and the value of judgment continues to go up. And this is more so relevant in our field, particularly as actuaries. You would all agree that insurance was the first field to start off with AI, even before AI was coined AI, because you had to predict risk. But from where we are to where we are now, you would vehemently agree, at least if I would say that the judgment quotient, the value of what you do with machines on top of it has actually gone up. So very quickly, I'll just talk, look, there are 5 typical ways people think about it, which is the vision, the natural language, cognition, as well as the robotic and autonomous vehicles, all fueled by machine learning. And these are many of the ways that recently generative AI is enabled, which is right from knowledge extraction, classification, summarization, content generation, and all of these are very relevant for your product marketing, product pricing engines to actually explain it, as well as on your claims side when you have to actually go through some of the adjudication processes. Now, coming to what it means for insurance, the disruption will have varying impact depending upon the sector. Now, the sector largely defined by the availability of data, but more importantly defined by the engagement quotient that you actually start to have with customers. So as you see on the left-hand side, the PNC lines start to have much greater level of disruption as you go down compared to the other lines as well. Now, what's in it for all of us in this room, specifically all of you, as you think of actuarial domains? Now, if you look at this chart, this is again an analysis that McKinsey had done, which actually suggests that the size of the bubble shows the size of the opportunity that AI would have in that particular domain. The biggest one is actually in the distribution, underwriting, and pricing, followed by the risk. And risk includes both risk prediction as well as risk management, right? And then followed by claims as well. So these are all in trillions of dollars, and this was run across the globe. This actually suggests that these domains will be the biggest impacted. Now, this is just one example of a carrier. This is from a PNC carrier. The left-hand side is somebody who we had actually profiled across 20 different organizations, and then the right-hand side is a sample of 5 to 6 organizations that had done this. Now, you could see that the right-hand side organization that had adopted AI, the metrics is kind of stark, not just across financial parameters, but also across the engagement parameters and the go-to-market parameters. This is pretty common, and it continues to happen to actually say, how do I now move not just prospecting, but also prospecting in a much more friendly manner? How do I keep the customer more engaged, more happy? Now, this is just an eye chart, but it is only to convey that the applications are actually robust and abundant across all lines of businesses and across all domains. This ranges from everything from distribution productivity management to prospecting to underwriting, pricing, claims, and renewals as well, and operations. Just one thing that at least I found quite exciting was when we were doing this 5-6 years ago, and this has become more of a reality, is if you look at underwriting as a domain, the way AI has transformed, and this is an illustration of how and what shape it could take in life. If you take the current state is largely a much more rules-driven engine, a rules-driven model that was developed over years and years of testing. And in the current state, people are actually thinking about going into much more of a digital simplified issue, which is where you submit information digitally, you read that information, and you're able to basically reduce and auto-issue policies. And at least in the India market, this is more common. Most carriers, 60 to 70% of the policies are underwritten digitally and auto-issue. But as you think about phase 2, which is what we call micro-segmentation and personalization, it's continuing to push the limits on how can you move from, let's say, 5 to 6 risk classes to a risk class of 1. And AI is able to do this because of the availability of information from your prior customers, prior policyholders, as well as all the external data that is out there in the market. But the more interesting thing is what we see, which is movement towards phase 3 and 4, which is a lot of carriers are contemplating this and thinking about how do you move to one-touch underwriting as well as continuously underwrite based on risk parameters and risk profiles that are emerging. Now, this is something that while the linear trajectory is what people thought of, we do believe by 2030 at least, just based on conversations and investments being made by companies, phase 3 and phase 4 will be much likely. And again, with a convergence of life and health insurance across the board and what the data starts to feed off each other, we do believe phase 3 and in fact phase 4 is not too far away. Right? Now, we'll move into claims, which is part of the topic that we wanted to talk about today. Now, this at least is, again, based on research, talking to people. We do believe it is set to be, the claims process itself is set to be disrupted across the value chain, right from prevention all the way to settlement. If you take a look, prevention not just in commercial lines, but also in the health business and in the life business, we do see a lot of sensor-driven prevention technologies being adopted. It could be personal devices, it could be commercial devices for industries. But also if you take the first notice of loss, many of this, at least in advanced geographies, is no longer through calling and reporting. There are automated ways through which FNOL is actually sent to the company and the response is garnered. And then if you start to take claims management, and a lot of even companies in India have invested heavily on figuring out how do you actually think about integrating and nudging customers to the preferred areas or to the preferred mode of care, be it in healthcare or be it in general insurance. If you start to think about loss assessment and repair, we've all heard of drone technology used in crop insurance in the US. We've all heard of how loss assessment happens through videos and cameras. And so now this, if you start to think about the extension of this into health insurance as well, now how do you actually take prior behavioral information about certain people and start to figure out for increasingly more and more common conditions, how can this loss assessment be more standardized than actually having to do it at a much more ad hoc manner in the hospitals as well. So people are investing to figure out what are those conditions, what are those chronic ailments for which you could actually do automated risk assessment. And then finally, you have this real-time settlement processes as well taking shape. So we do believe that 90% of the claims will be once and done from the time it starts to going, and 100% of the claims will be done online by 2030. This just means that AI will have to increasingly play a much more central role. Now, as I said, this is not a chart to suggest replacement, right? It is a chart to suggest how do you increase the value of judgment for everybody involved in this journey, be it the customer, be it the distribution. How do you provide the transparency so that across each part, the quality of the process, the quality of the experience, and the quality of judgment actually goes up? And that's where AI can kind of help, because in most organizations, people have done this. It is an augmentation journey than anything else. Now, some of the examples that we have seen, and this is across lines, if you take right from the guided estimation for physical damage to the technology aiding how do you actually do estimation to everything to selection process, smart segmentation, all of these are examples that we have seen live with significant impact as well. Now, in health in particular, we do look at different domains and how AI is applicable. Now, if you take eligibility, for example, there is a lot of investments going into figuring out how do you now take what you would have as data within the policy documents, how do you read them, how do you convert them into metadata to figure out what is the true eligibility and what is the benefit exclusion, because that's where we do see a lot of leakage actually happening to get to that accuracy in claims. Similarly, when we think of medical necessity, again, this is more common in places where the DRGs are much more standardized and there is episodes of care that has been standardized. But even in other emerging markets, we do see the mismatch of diagnosis and service being one of the key reasons why people are investing in AI to figure out what is that anomaly. Similarly, the overutilization as well. The other thing is we also look at a lot of provider management that AI actually helps with. It could be right from similar to your steering that you actually see in motor. How do you actually think about site of care redirection? How do you think about provider quality? And move to different forms of actually like compensation and payment structuring that the insurance companies and the hospitals can have. Now, on the right-hand side, this is just a lot of jargons, but to show that previously, a lot of this was done and continues to be done through expert rules or through associative learning. And we do feel like now there is a lot of natural language processing when it comes to benefit and exclusion processes, or when it comes to site of care redirection, there is a lot of voice analysis as well as social network analysis being actually performed. Now, like we said, AI has its application across the board. This is just one quick case example of a carrier in the UK who deployed this across the board, right from figuring out how to deploy AI for bodily injury litigation management to actually understand at what point to settle versus at what point to not settle for a particular claim, at what point and which legal firms you should actually be working with on an ongoing basis, which legal firms you should settle right away, things like that, all the way from fraud management and creating reusable assets so that, like I said, the cost of prediction continues to go down, not just because of the value of prediction, but also because of the Lego blocks that you're actually setting up in organizations. These reusable data Lego blocks that you set up, or these model Lego blocks, actually brings down the cost of prediction significantly, right? And they did see 4 to 5% combined ratio improvement in a market that is already high performing, specifically in this particular line of business, right? Now, with that, maybe I would just skip one of the slides. This is again in healthcare where all you look at it. But one of the key things that at least that I've learned through my years, the last 8 years of working with people in this is much more of a cross-functional exercise. And the biggest unlock that you could have is when people actually work together on an ongoing basis. And this will include not just your project team, the technology team, but it will include your claim specialists, it will include your core underwriting people, it will include your actuarial expertise, as well as data science and the data engineers. So oftentimes, unless these cross-functional disciplines come together, this, at least unlike technology projects, which even increasingly now we realize it needs to be cross-functional, but unlike those, these AI-driven projects or ways of working will only come to fruition if you have these cross-functional teams set up to work with joint incentives. With that, I'll pause, and it was hopefully relatively short. I'll take a few questions, with Rajesh as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Karthi, for that wonderful presentation. insights. Um, I don't think I have any questions from the audience yet. So maybe I would ask a question. Do you see any India-specific challenges uh, compared to global when we talk about AI implementations in insurance companies in India?
Yeah, no, can you hear me okay? Yeah, so I think the specific, at least the last 3 years that I've been in India, the biggest conversations that come up is one, the availability of public infrastructure layer that, let's say for the US, you have the MIB database, the other database through which you could actually cross-check for fraud and waste and abuse, or in the claims front, you do have a lot of social media scanning that is done to provide whether this person would be a high case of a fraud or not. That public infrastructure is actually rapidly evolving in India, but it has not reached a stage where it is used on a consistent basis, right? We do see more of that being used in the banking industry and less in the insurance industry, and I do believe that that is a space that will actually unlock a lot of value. The second part is we also see this cross-functional working, and that nature is something that, again, as part of different industries, things are picking up. In insurance, it's something that we do anticipate in India to pick up quickly as well. Those are two big, at least, differences that I look at when I look at adoption from other countries.
And this public infrastructure, does it develop on its own, or is there a regulatory intervention which is kind of needed, or how it happened globally?
I think it was actually a combination, right? For example, if you take, again, the US, the SROs, there actually took the lead to set up some of this. It did come as part of the public infrastructure. For example, you take group benefits in the US. It's a much more data-driven industry where every group declares the type of benefits that they availed from certain insurance companies. They do declare the RFP process that they went through. Now, if you look at it, it benefits both the companies that are coming in for group benefits and the insurers, because now you're able to benchmark what type of packages and policies were actually done. So I would say it's a combination of both the SROs like the councils here as well as the regulator. And we do have a lot of that infrastructure already that we just have to figure out how to best use them, because most of it is right now used for statistics and reporting backward looking rather than for predicting forward looking, right? So that's something that both the parties will need to shape and structure.
So I don't see any questions on the slide. Anybody would like to ask any questions? No. Okay. So how do you see, with this AI evolving so fast, technology moving so fast, how would it impact the customer journeys in the next 4 or 5 years in the Indian context?
Look, I think the biggest change, at least that we saw in how customers interacted, was they did not just approach the journey through the insurance value chain, right? And this is something you're already starting to see with a lot of embedded insurance. So if AI deployed right, you would imagine that it's made much more simpler for them to understand the product complexity, make much more sense to approach the journey through different angles, not just through insurance companies. For example, again, you take the likes of Haven Life or Besto or others, the starting point of the journey is not from their website, right? It's actually from other means when they're actually going through their purchase for, let's say, baby products, for example. So we do see the origination part of the journey would actually like take shape very differently. And number two, if AI done well, then the simplicity of what they need would be conveyed much more comprehensively, right? Otherwise, it continues to remain a much more of a push industry than a pull. So hopefully with AI, some of the unlocks would be more of, can this be made much more easier for people to understand and ask rather than understand and be told?
So today morning, there was this discussion, and one of the issue that was raised is the customer trust. Claim being the moment of the truth, and claim journey being very painful for a customer, right? So how will that undergo a change with AI? Do you believe that will, because that I believe is one of the roadblocks which people.
Yep. No, and I think one of the very, I think the short answer is yes, and absolutely. And one of the very practical examples is if you think about it now, even in health insurance, from the moment a person is, say, allowed to be discharged by the hospital to the time the person leaves, it takes about 6 to 7 hours because of the various changes in the integration network. Now, with AI, the hope and the projects that, if it all comes to fruition, that many carriers are working on is to make sure you are able to predict what will be the likely payment, what will be the likely outcome a day before the discharge. Now, that's just one example of saying that the moment of truth is made real so that it's much more convenient, it's much more transparent for the customer to actually believe that, yes, I can walk into a hospital like in the US with a card and just walk out the moment the doctor says walk out. So again, there are flaws in every market. US has its own flaws because of the revenue cycle management system. But that said, I do believe that with proper integration of technology systems and AI, that moment of truth will be made much more transparent and trustable.
No, that if it can do that, that will be very helpful. And that brings me to the question like, will we ever get to the real-time claim settlement? Like, people are very happy to see RTGS and EFT, etc. Will AI help us so much that we get into real-time claim settlement?
Look, I think that is still I mean, it depends on how we define real time being like just right now, right at that moment. Now, I don't think it's just an AI problem, right? It is a lot of, again, standardization on how people communicate with each other. For example, you want the providers and the hospitals to talk, the providers and the insurers to talk, or in the case of a garage network and the insurers to talk. So it will help, but will it be the only unlock? Absolutely not. It will require a lot of standardization of the language. It will require a standard integration across the chain. And once that happens, real time will be a reality. But I can certainly assure that the moment claims hits an insurance portal or an insurance organization's portal, to the moment the insurance company makes its decision saying, yes, this is the claim I want to pay, this is the amount I want to pay, AI should absolutely enable that without a lot of hurdles and barriers. But whether it will be real time all the way to the consumer, and that requires, because of the different stakeholders involved, to talk the common language, right? And that will be the biggest unlock, at least.
Right. One last question from audience in case there is any. Can we have the mic?
Will it be subscription based or how you look at it?
Can you repeat again just for the benefit of the audience?
What I was asking is that will this AI would be subscription based like Finacle, all the banking industry is using. So same thing like claim settlement or claim management that is used by everyone. So it's a standardization.
Oh, great question. I think there will be certain domains where there will be utilities created for the entire industry to use. For example, the fraud analytics utility, like Canada has started investing in a common fraud analytics utility for the entire industry to consume, one example, right? But there will be certain parts like your underwriting and pricing, and the core part of it will be in-house generated because of the nature of data you consume, your policies and procedures. But if you take across the domain, at least what we have witnessed is close to 60 to 70% will be much more customized and in-house developed. 30 to 40% could be utilities if, again, taken up by the SROs or any other organization.
Okay. Thanks, Karthi, for the time, and
No, thank you, Rajesh. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. This was a really informative session. Requesting Mr. Rajesh to present a small memento to the speaker. thank you, requesting Mr. Vishwanathan Mahindra to present a small token of appreciation to the chair. So you go ahead. Ab jaiye.